say, look, I experienced this?
Yeah, well, that's actually a very good question because, there isn't sort of like a Men in Black hotline or anything.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is sort of trial and error. A lot of people stay silent for years. For example, when the Men in Black movie came out in 1997, a lot of people who saw the film were like, wow, that's the people who interviewed me or silenced me or threatened me. And so what a lot of people just do is that because they've had a UFO experience and, they recognize the link between the Men in Black and UFOs, they just Google, a local UFO group in their area or a nationwide organization and pass the details on. And, it's like, for example, with me, doing shows like yours right now, people often will email me and say, hey, I listened to that show. And I listened to the show specifically because I saw it was advertised about the Men in Black and I had an experience and I wanted to tell you about it. So that happens, I think, a lot, not just obviously to me, but to all people who write about these sort of phenomena. People listen to the interviews and then they contact you with their experiences and then, they spread from there, etc. And so I think that's primarily how it works. Although there have been some cases where people have assumed that the Men in Black are from the government, and they've made an irate phone call to their congressman and said, I was threatened by this person from officialdom, and, what are you going to do about it, and so it's sort of like a varied range of ways and means in which the stories surface, but it sort of broadly falls into those specific categories, I think.
You've been a advisor or a writer and consultant to the SciFi Channel?
Yeah, I've done a lot of sort of TV shows, whether History Channel and SciFi Channel, Discovery, where, as well as sort of appearing on screen, I've helped in terms of securing people to interview and stuff like that, yeah.
Do you find that the SciFi Channel and maybe other channels are reflecting your truth or the other people's experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, when you have like an hour-long TV show with 3 commercial breaks, there's only so much information you can get into a 45-minute show. But I think for the most part, shows are pretty good at portraying the facts as we're able to perceive them. Of course, you always get a little bit of, there's an entertainment angle as well.
I totally understand
but
that.
I do think for the most part, document, whether it's history, discovery, sci-fi, I actually do believe they do a very good job in terms of some of their documentaries. Now, the mainstream news, the news stations often put more of like a sort of humor-filled, light-hearted angle on UFO stories. And, again, I understand that because UFOs sell. It's like it's a entertaining story for the end of the news. But I always think it is a bit of a shame and it kind of, it's tiresome at times even when, you've got for example, a military pilot who's seen a UFO, but they have to get a little X-Files type joke in. If they were interviewing a military pilot about something else, nothing to do with UFOs, it would get full respect. But it's almost like when you're dealing with UFOs, we've got to get a little joke in there somewhere. And it's kind of like, well, why? You've got a highly credible military witness, trained as a fighter pilot, conversant with what goes on in the skies, has a credible, university, never mind college, but university background, probably, highly trained in not just aviation, but electronics, science, etc. But you still feel the need to, make a joke about Mulder and Scully or whatever. So.
I think that people have a hard time dealing with it. People in the news are probably instructed how to cover it, how to navigate the domain of the conversation.
I would agree with you. And I think it's just a shame that sometimes, the mainstream media outlets don't pursue the UFO subject as they would say, for example, Watergate or Iran-Contra or weapons of mass destruction or whatever. Why don't you put, for 12 months, a team of investigative journalists to pursue what really happened at Roswell? You might actually solve it, but it's almost like, no, there's no way, that this particular news channel or this newspaper wants to be known as the newspaper that chases little green men. It's almost as if their hands are tied before the investigation starts because there's such a stigma involved, and I think that's a shame. It's like a news story is a news story just because it, whether it involves a crooked politician or UFO. So what? It still should be viewed as a news story.
Do you think that in your lifetime, in our lifetime, that there will be disclosure?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, when people ask me this, I don't want to come across as like a pessimist or anything like that. I'm a very upbeat person, but I'm also a realist. And, I think if governments are going to disclose the truth, I think they will do so if the news isn't bad and if it's to their advantage to do so. If there's any aspect of the UFO phenomenon that's sort of disturbing, dark, and even malevolent, and also if the government doesn't necessarily have all the answers, and so is sort of, a lot of people think the government has all the answers because it has a lot of data. Well, it's like even if you have a crashed UFO and a few bodies from Roswell, it doesn't actually give you any indication of the agenda or the goal, long-term or otherwise, of what these entities might be doing. So in other words, I suspect part of the reason why there hasn't been disclosure is because the government might be quite in the dark as to what's going on. They may know somebody's skulking around and flying around, possibly abducting us and doing all sorts of different things, but they may not actually know where they're from or what they want and why they're here. And those are the profound questions that we want answers to. And I suspect if governments say, well, yes, there's a real UFO phenomenon, but sorry guys, we're as much in the dark as you are, even though we're the government, that could actually cause some alarm. People's natural assumption is if the government's hiding it, they've got all the answers. They may have as many questions as we do, and they're sort of fearful of admitting the fact that they're not really in control of the situation.
Good points. I actually think they know way more than we do.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. I think they know way more, but whether they know enough to actually admit that we've got a lot of data, but we're not entirely sure of their agenda.
Right.
And I think that's what people want to know. Not necessarily just that aliens or UFOs exist, or that something from another dimension exists or whatever and is visiting us, but what are they doing here? If those sort of critical questions can't be answered, then people might think, well, the government actually isn't in control. We thought they were hiding it because they knew everything and they were in control of it, but they're no different to us. They've got a lot of data, they've got reports, they might even have a crashed UFO, but they don't have answers as to why they're coming here.
That's a really, really good point, and I actually think that the government has never really been in control of everything anyway.
No, I think they're just basically sort of, staying on top of the situation is probably a better way of wording it.
Who do you think really is at the helm of controlling disclosure? The off-planet beings and cultures or the government?
Well, one of the ironic things about this whole subject is I think one of the chief reasons why the subject is still sort of cloaked in secrecy is because these entities, whether they're extraterrestrial, interdimensional, paranormal, time travelers, whatever they are, they don't seem to want to show themselves either. So ironically, that actually helps the government's position to hide the information. It's not like the government's struggling to hide the data and the aliens or whatever they are thwarting them at every opportunity. The entities themselves don't seem to want to come forward and into the open and, land on the White House lawn. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing them saving the rainforests or, saving the polar ice caps or curing pollution and overpopulation. They're kind of like silent partners hiding in the background. And this does help the government's position. So, I think when we come to this issue of who's hiding stuff, how it's being hidden, it's almost like it's working from both sides. Both sides don't want the story disclosing. So that makes our job even more difficult. But when it comes to, the point you made or the question you raised about within government who's hiding this, I don't think, it's the presidential office or the CIA or the National Security Agency. What I personally believe is that there is almost like a hidden government within government, if you like, sort of like a black project where, people talk about these black programs where money is sort of siphoned off into, from one project into another, and it isn't sort of answerable to Congress or the Senate. It isn't covered by congressional oversight or